Mother bear got stuck in the net and drowning in the water. What this baby did put everyone in tears. Let us know where you're watching from. If you love my content, consider supporting it with a super thanks. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe. It'll help us to remain in touch with amazing people like you. The morning mist hung like a delicate veil over Pine Creek, where the Tucker family's cabin stood nestled among towering evergreens. Soft sunlight filtered through the trees, casting dappled shadows across the wooden porch where 10-month-old Lily Tucker sat playing with her favorite rattle. Her mother, Eleanor, hummed softly as she hung laundry on the line, casting occasional glances at her daughter, who giggled at a butterfly fluttering nearby. Beyond the creek's edge, where the water rippled over smooth stones, a mother bear and her small cub emerged from the dense forest. The mother's dark fur glistened with morning dew as she guided her curious offspring toward the water. The cub, barely 3 months old, wobbled on uncertain paws, sniffing eagerly at unfamiliar scents carried by the gentle breeze. Eleanor tensed when she spotted the bears but relaxed when she saw how far they were from the cabin. "Look, Lily," she whispered, pointing toward the pair. "Nature's most devoted mother." Lily babbled in response, her wide blue eyes fixed on the magnificent creatures. Eleanor returned to her chores, disappearing around the corner of the cabin to gather more clothes from the basket. The mother bear approached the creek cautiously, testing the water with one massive paw before wading in. Her cub remained on the shore, batting playfully at a cluster of cattails swaying in the breeze. Neither bear noticed the tangled fishing net partially submerged among the reeds, abandoned weeks earlier by careless visitors to Pine Creek. As the mother bear moved deeper into the creek, searching for fish beneath the surface, her hind leg suddenly caught in the hidden net. She jerked backward, startled by the unexpected resistance. The movement only tightened the net's grip, its weathered ropes cutting into her fur. She let out a low, confused grunt. On the shore, the cub sensed something wrong and began pacing anxiously, releasing high-pitched whines that carried across the water. The mother bear struggled harder, twisting her massive body to free herself. Instead, she slipped on the creek's slick bottom, plunging sideways into deeper water with a tremendous splash. Lily's head turned at the sound, her rattle forgotten as she watched the bear thrashing in the water. The net, weighed down by stones and debris caught in its mesh, began to drag the mother bear under. Her desperate roars echoed through the trees as she fought to keep her head above water. The cub's cries grew frantic, its tiny body trembling as it watched its mother drowning. Eleanor had walked to the neighbor's cabin just up the path, leaving Lily secured in her play area on the porch. But the wooden gate, weathered by seasons of rain and sun, had a latch that hadn't quite clicked into place. As the bear's distressed roars intensified, Lily pushed against the gate with surprising strength for her tiny frame. The latch gave way. With determination in her eyes that seemed impossible for a child so young, Lily crawled from the safety of the porch. Her small hands gripped the damp earth as she made her way toward the sounds of distress, drawn by something beyond understanding, a pure, instinctive compassion that knew no fear. The mother bear's struggles weakened as water filled her lungs. The cub ran back and forth along the shore, its pitiful wails rising in pitch. And still, unnoticed by either animal, Lily Tucker crawled steadily toward the creek, her path illuminated by shafts of sunlight breaking through the forest canopy. What would happen when this helpless human child reached the shore? What could a baby possibly do to save a drowning bear? The forest fell eerily silent, as if holding its breath, waiting for the impossible to unfold. Unbeknownst to Eleanor, her neighbor Gabriel Harrison had been tracking this particular mother bear for weeks. A wildlife photographer with publications in National Geographic, Gabriel had developed a deep connection with the local bear population. This mother bear, whom he'd named Sierra, had become something of a muse for his latest photography project, documenting maternal behavior across species. Gabriel had just returned from photographing eagles at dawn when he heard the commotion. Grabbing his binoculars from his desk, he rushed to his cabin window and focused on the creek. His heart nearly stopped when he saw Sierra thrashing in the water, caught in what appeared to be a net. But what made his blood run cold was the tiny human figure he spotted crawling toward the water's edge. "Dear God," he whispered, recognizing Eleanor's baby. He dropped the binoculars and bolted for the door, grabbing a hunting knife from his gear belt. But Gabriel's cabin was a quarter-mile from the creek. Could he make it in time? Meanwhile, Eleanor chatted with her elderly neighbor, Rose Willard, completely unaware of the unfolding crisis. Rose, nearly 80 and hard of hearing, didn't register the distant sounds of the bear's struggle. "I found these wild blackberries growing near my compost," Rose said, offering Eleanor a basket. "Perfect for that pie you mentioned." Back at the creek, Lily had reached the water's edge. The cool mud squished between her tiny fingers as she paused, mesmerized by the scene before her. The bear cub spotted her first, freezing in terror at the sight of a human. But instead of retreating, the desperate cub made a sound that was almost a plea, a heart-wrenching whimper that seemed to transcend the barrier between species. Lily sat back on her haunches and did something remarkable. She extended her small hand toward the frightened cub, palm up, in a gesture of peace that defied her tender age. Her lips formed indistinct babbles, but her voice was surprisingly gentle, almost melodic. The cub, torn between fear of humans and desperation for its mother, took a hesitant step toward Lily. In the water, Sierra's struggles grew weaker, her massive head barely visible above the surface. The net had wrapped more tightly around her leg, and a second loop had caught her midsection during her panicked thrashing. Gabriel sprinted through the forest, branches whipping his face as he ran. The distance seemed endless. He knew these woods intimately, but had never felt them so vast, so insurmountable. His lungs burned as he pushed himself harder, driven by the image of a helpless child and a drowning bear. If the mother bear managed to free herself while the baby was so close, the outcome could be catastrophic. Eleanor suddenly tensed during her conversation with Rose. A mother's intuition, powerful and inexplicable, made her stomach clench. "I need to check on Lily," she said abruptly, setting down her tea. Rose nodded, not understanding the sudden urgency in her young neighbor's eyes. At the creek's edge, something extraordinary was happening. The bear cub, driven by instinct and desperation, had overcome its fear of the human child. It now stood only feet from Lily, their eyes locked in a silent communication that transcended words. The cub turned toward its drowning mother, then back to Lily, as if trying to communicate. Lily reached out and grabbed a stick floating near the shore, a fallen branch about 2 feet long. With surprising dexterity for a child her age, she pushed it toward the cub. The cub sniffed it cautiously, then took the end in its mouth. In the water, Sierra had stopped struggling. Her massive body floated limply, partially submerged, only her nose and eyes visible above the surface. Her gaze locked onto her cub and the human child in what appeared to be a final goodbye. Gabriel burst through the tree line just as Eleanor emerged from Rose's cabin. Both adults spotted Lily at the same moment. Both cried out in terror, and both began racing toward the creek. But they were still too far away to intervene. What happened next would be debated, analyzed, and marveled at for years to come in Pine Creek. Some would call it coincidence, others divine intervention. and the more scientific minds would attribute it to the remarkable intelligence of bears and the untainted instincts of a child not yet taught to fear the wild. The bear cub, with the stick clamped firmly in its jaws, waded into the shallow water. Lily remained on shore, babbling encouragement as if coaching the small creature. The cub paddled awkwardly toward its mother, dragging the stick. When it reached Sierra, the cub released the stick and began pulling at the net with its teeth. Not randomly, but at precisely the point where the main knot had formed. Perhaps it had observed humans with fishing gear before, or perhaps it was merely lucky, but its sharp teeth found purchase on the rope that formed the central tangle of the net. Eleanor and Gabriel converged on the creek bank simultaneously, both reaching for Lily. But both adults froze, astonished by what they were witnessing. The cub's determined efforts had loosened the net enough that Sierra could shift position. With her head raised slightly higher above water, she took a desperate gasp of air. "Don't move," Gabriel whispered to Eleanor, his hand gripping her arm. "The cub is actually helping. If we startle them now." Tears streamed down Eleanor's face as she watched her baby sitting calmly at the water's edge, still making those gentle, encouraging sounds toward the bears. "How did she—" Eleanor began, her voice breaking with fear and amazement. "I don't know," Gabriel admitted. "But we need to let this play out. If that mother bear goes under again, she's not coming back up." The cub continued gnawing frantically at the net, and incredibly the heavy mesh began to give way. Sierra, with renewed energy from that life-saving breath, gave a powerful kick with her free leg. The combined efforts of mother and cub created enough slack in the net that Sierra's caught leg slipped partially free. But they weren't safe yet. Sierra was weakened from oxygen deprivation and struggle, and the cub was too small to complete the job alone. The net still entangled Sierra's torso, keeping her partially submerged. That's when Lily did something that made Eleanor's heart stop. The baby picked up a second stick, this one longer and sturdier than the first, and pushed it toward the water. It floated within reach of Sierra's massive paw. "What is she doing?" Eleanor whispered, horrified yet transfixed. "I think—" Gabriel's voice trailed off, hardly daring to believe what he was seeing. Sierra's intelligent eyes focused on the floating branch. With the last of her strength, she reached out and clamped her jaws around it. The stick provided just enough leverage for her to brace herself against the creek bottom and push upward. With a tremendous heave, Sierra raised her upper body further out of the water. This new position allowed the cub better access to the net. Its sharp teeth worked furiously at the remaining strands, shredding the weathered rope fiber by fiber. Each snap of the net loosened Sierra's bonds a little more. But time was running out. Sierra's strength was failing again, her massive body trembling with exhaustion. The cub worked desperately, sensing its mother's fading energy. Gabriel made a decision. "I need to help them finish this," he said, drawing his knife. "Keep Lily safe." Before Eleanor could protest, Gabriel was wading into the creek, approaching the bears with slow, deliberate movements. The cub spotted him and retreated with a frightened yelp, swimming back toward shore where it huddled near Lily. An unlikely alliance formed in crisis. Sierra's eyes tracked Gabriel, but she was too weak to perceive him as a threat. Gabriel moved cautiously to her side and began sawing through the remaining sections of the net with his knife. "Easy, Sierra," he murmured, using the name he'd given her months ago. "Just a little more." With several precise cuts, Gabriel severed the last of the net's grip on Sierra's body. The massive bear rolled free, finding her footing in the creek bed. For one terrifying moment, she stood eye to eye with Gabriel, water streaming from her fur, her breathing ragged. Eleanor held her breath. every muscle poised to dash forward and grab Lily if the bear charged. But Sierra did something unexpected. She turned her gaze from Gabriel to the shore, to her cub and the human child sitting side by side on the muddy bank. With deliberate care, Sierra lumbered toward them. Eleanor's heart pounded in her chest. Every maternal instinct screamed at her to rush forward and snatch her baby away, but Gabriel gestured for her to remain still. "Trust me," he mouthed silently. Sierra reached the shore, water cascading from her sodden fur. The bear's massive frame dwarfed both the cub and Lily. She lowered her head, her breath coming in labored gasps, and gently nudged her cub with her nose. The cub pressed against its mother with relieved whimpers, but remarkably, it didn't retreat from Lily's presence. Sierra turned her attention to the human child. Eleanor bit back a scream as the mother bear's snout hovered just inches from her daughter's face. Lily showed no fear, only fascination. Her tiny hand reached up, patting the air just short of touching the bear's muzzle. Sierra remained perfectly still, her dark eyes studying the child who had, through some miracle of innocence and timing, helped orchestrate her rescue. After what seemed an eternity, but was merely seconds, Sierra made a soft huffing sound. Then, with surprising gentleness, she backed away, guiding her cub toward the forest edge. At the tree line, Sierra paused. She turned back toward Lily, Gabriel, and Eleanor, who had finally rushed to her daughter's side. The bear rose briefly on her hind legs, not in threat, but as if taking one final look at the strange gathering by the creek. Then she dropped down and disappeared into the forest, her cub scampering at her heels. Eleanor collapsed to her knees, scooping Lily into her arms with a sob of relief and disbelief. "How?" she gasped, looking up at Gabriel. "How did she know what to do? She's just a baby." Gabriel knelt beside them, his clothes soaked and muddy. "I've spent my life studying animals," he said quietly, "and I still can't explain what I just witnessed." He looked at Lily with wonder in his eyes. "Some connections transcend explanation. Your daughter has a gift." Eleanor hugged Lily tighter, feeling her small heart beating steadily against her own racing one. "You can't tell anyone about this," she whispered urgently. "If people found out about Sierra and her cub—" "I won't," Gabriel promised. "But I think this forest just showed us something important, something we're all in danger of forgetting." As they made their way back to the cabin, neither adult noticed the small dark object that had fallen from Gabriel's pocket during the rescue, his satellite phone, now half buried in the mud at the creek's edge. 3 days later, life at Pine Creek had almost returned to normal. Eleanor kept Lily closer than usual, jumping at every rustle in the underbrush near their cabin. Gabriel had returned to his photography, though he found himself scanning constantly for Sierra and her cub during his forest excursions. What none of them realized was that Gabriel's lost satellite phone had been discovered, not by a person, but by a curious raven attracted to the shiny object in the mud. The bird had pecked at the device, inadvertently activating its emergency function. The distress signal, registered to Gabriel Harrison, professional wildlife photographer, pinged the nearest ranger station with GPS coordinates. Park Ranger Meredith Chambers was the first to respond to the unusual signal. Finding no person in distress at the location, she began a standard sweep of the area. That's when she discovered the shredded remnants of the fishing net, some strands still caught on branches near the creek. Puzzled, Meredith followed the trail of evidence. Bear tracks, smaller paw prints she identified as belonging to a cub, and most alarmingly, what appeared to be the handprints and knee marks of a very small child in the now dried mud. "What happened here?" she murmured, taking photographs of the scene with her department-issued camera. With professional thoroughness, she collected Gabriel's satellite phone as evidence and logged the coordinates into her GPS unit. Meanwhile, at the Tucker cabin, Eleanor was hanging laundry again while Lily played in her newly reinforced enclosure on the porch. She nearly dropped her basket when she spotted Gabriel hurrying up the path, his expression tense. "We have a problem," he said without preamble. "My satellite phone is missing. I've looked everywhere. It must have fallen out during the bear incident." Eleanor's face paled. "Could someone find it? Trace it back to you?" "Potentially," Gabriel admitted. "It has my ID information and emergency contacts. If someone finds it and turns it in..." He didn't need to finish the thought. Questions would be asked. Investigations might begin. And Sierra and her cub could face relocation or worse if authorities believed they had interacted dangerously with humans. "We need to find it," Eleanor said firmly, already gathering Lily into her arms. "Right now." But they were too late. As they approached the creek, they spotted an unfamiliar truck with Forest Service markings parked on the service road. A woman in a ranger uniform was photographing the area, her movements methodical and professional. "Ranger Chambers," Gabriel said, recognizing her from previous encounters in his photography work. "Fancy meeting you here?" Meredith straightened, her expression revealing nothing. "Mr. Harrison, I was responding to a distress signal from this location." She held up a sealed evidence bag containing his satellite phone. "Your phone, I believe?" Gabriel nodded, maintaining a casual demeanor despite his racing heart. "Must have dropped it during a shoot. Thanks for recovering it." Meredith's gaze shifted to Eleanor and Lily, then back to the creek bank where the evidence of their encounter remained. "Interesting scene here. Bear tracks, a shredded net, and what appears to be..." She paused, looking pointedly at Lily, child-sized handprints in the mud. Eleanor clutched Lily tighter. "My daughter likes to play near the water sometimes. I always supervise, of course." "Of course," Meredith echoed, her tone making it clear she didn't believe them. "Mr. Harrison, Ms. Tucker?" Eleanor supplied reluctantly. "Eleanor Tucker?" "Ms. Tucker, I think we need to have a conversation about what exactly happened here." Meredith gestured to the obvious signs of struggle along the creek bank. "Because this looks like a wildlife incident that went unreported, and that's a violation of park regulations." Gabriel stepped forward. "Meredith, it's not what you think. I haven't decided what to think yet," the ranger interrupted. "But I do know that a bear was in distress here, and somehow a child was involved, and nobody reported it." Her hand rested on her radio. Standard procedure would be to alert wildlife management. If a bear is engaging with humans, especially a child... "No!" Eleanor blurted out. "Please, you can't." Meredith's expression hardened. "Can't what, Miss Tucker?" "Follow protocol to protect both the public and the wildlife." Gabriel exchanged a desperate glance with Eleanor. They were trapped. Lying would only make things worse, but the truth seemed too fantastic to believe. It was Lily who broke the impasse. The baby suddenly squirmed in Eleanor's arms, pointing excitedly toward the forest edge and babbling loudly. All three adults turned and froze. Standing at the tree line, partially obscured by shadows, was Sierra. The mother bear stood perfectly still, her dark eyes fixed on the humans. Behind her, the cub peeked cautiously around its mother's bulk. For a breathless moment no one moved, not the humans, not the bears. Lily babbled again, a string of nonsensical sounds that nevertheless carried an unmistakable tone of recognition and delight. She stretched her arms toward the bears, fingers opening and closing as if in greeting. Sierra took one deliberate step forward, then another. Meredith's hand moved instinctively to her sidearm. Standard issue for rangers dealing with potentially dangerous wildlife. "Don't," Gabriel whispered urgently. Please, Meredith, just watch." Against all protocol and training, Ranger Chambers hesitated, her hand hovering over her weapon as the massive bear continued its approach. Every instinct told her to protect the humans, especially the child, yet something in Gabriel's urgent plea made her pause. Sierra stopped about 30 feet from the group. With theatrical deliberateness, she lowered her head to the ground, then raised it again. The gesture was unmistakable, non-threatening, almost deferential. "She's acknowledging us," Gabriel breathed, his photographer's eye recognizing behavior he'd never before documented. "This is impossible." Eleanor took a cautious step forward, still holding Lily securely. "She remembers," she said softly. "She knows what happened here." Lily squealed with delight, reaching toward the bears with such insistence that Eleanor struggled to maintain her grip. The cub responded to the baby's sounds, taking a tentative step out from behind its mother. Meredith watched in stunned silence as an extraordinary interaction unfolded before her. The beared cub approached to within 20 feet of the humans, far closer than wild bears typically ventured, and made a soft huffing sound that eerily mirrored Lily's babbles. "What am I seeing?" Meredith finally whispered, her hand now completely away from her weapon. Gabriel turned to her, his expression solemn. "Something sacred," he said simply. "Something that doesn't belong in a report." Sierra called to her cub with a low grunt, and the young bear reluctantly retreated to its mother's side. With one final look at the assembled humans, a gaze that lingered longest on Lily, Sierra turned and melted back into the forest, her cub following closely. When they had vanished completely, Meredith turned to Gabriel and Eleanor, her professional demeanor visibly shaken. "Explain," she demanded, though her voice lacked its earlier authority. "What just happened?" Gabriel and Eleanor exchanged glances, and then, haltingly at first but with growing confidence, they recounted the events of 3 days ago. The mother bear caught in the fishing net, the baby who somehow escaped her enclosure, the remarkable cooperation between human child and bear cub that ultimately saved Sierra's life. As the story unfolded, Meredith's expression cycled through disbelief, wonder, and finally something approaching reverence. When they finished, she stood in silence for a long moment, staring at the place where the bears had disappeared. "In 15 years as a ranger," she finally said, "I've never heard anything like this. I've never seen a wild bear behave that way." She looked at Lily, who was contentedly playing with Eleanor's necklace, seemingly oblivious to the significance of what had just occurred. "And I've certainly never seen a child." "We know how it sounds," Eleanor said quietly. "If I hadn't seen it myself, I wouldn't believe it either." Meredith took a deep breath, then did something unexpected. She removed her official ranger hat and ran a hand through her hair, a gesture that seemed to symbolically set aside her professional role. "Off the record," she said, "I believe you." "What I just saw—" She shook her head, words failing her. "The question is," Gabriel ventured cautiously, "what happens now?" "Officially?" Meredith's gaze drifted back to the forest. "Officially?" She paused, then reached into her pocket and pulled out her small field notebook. With deliberate movements, she tore out the pages containing her notes about the scene. "Officially, I responded to a false alarm from a dropped satellite phone. I found no evidence of wildlife distress or human involvement. Just a lost piece of equipment that I've now returned to its owner." Relief washed over Eleanor's face. "Thank you," she whispered. "Don't thank me yet," Meredith cautioned, her expression turning serious again. "Because while I'm willing to keep this incident off the books, we still have a situation. That bear, Sierra, you called her, has now had multiple close encounters with humans. Regardless of how remarkable those encounters were, it creates a potential danger. Bears that lose their natural wariness of humans often end up being destroyed. The word hung in the air like a guillotine blade. "What can we do?" Eleanor asked, unconsciously tightening her hold on Lily. Meredith considered for a moment. "The fishing season opens next week. This creek will be filled with people. If Sierra and her cub come looking for your daughter again, they need to be relocated," Gabriel finished, his voice heavy with resignation. "Somewhere safer, away from human activity." "Yes," Meredith agreed, "and I think I know just the place. There's a remote valley about 70 miles north of here. No roads, no trails, excellent salmon runs. Perfect bear habitat with minimal human interference." She looked at Gabriel. "But I'd need help tracking and tranquilizing them for transport. Someone who knows their patterns, who they might trust enough to get close." Gabriel nodded slowly. "I can help, but—" He glanced at Eleanor and Lily. "Will they be safe there? Really safe?" "It's protected wilderness," Meredith assured him. "No hunting, no fishing, no development. They'd have a better chance there than anywhere near human settlement." Eleanor blinked back tears, surprised by the wave of emotion that hit her at the thought of Sierra and her cub being taken away. It was irrational. They were wild animals, not pets. Yet the connection formed during that incredible rescue had left its mark on her heart. "When would this happen?" she asked softly. "The sooner the better," Meredith replied. "Before Sierra establishes a pattern of seeking human contact." She hesitated, then added with unexpected gentleness, Would you and Lily want to be there?" "When we release them into their new home." The question caught Eleanor off guard. "Is that even allowed?" "Not typically, no," Meredith admitted. "But nothing about this situation is typical, and I think—" Her voice softened further. "I think it might provide some closure for all of you." Gabriel placed a supportive hand on Eleanor's shoulder. "It would make a remarkable final chapter to their story," he said, "a proper goodbye." Eleanor looked down at Lily, who gazed back with innocent blue eyes, unaware of the weight of the moment. "Yes," she decided, "we'll be there." The next week passed in a blur of preparation. Gabriel worked closely with Meredith, tracking Sierra and her cub through the forest surrounding Pine Creek. They were careful, methodical, determined to ensure the bear's safety during capture and transport. Eleanor found herself oddly melancholy as the day of relocation approached. She took Lily to the creek each morning, though always from a safe distance, watching for any sign of their unlikely friends. The bears didn't appear again, but sometimes, in the rustling of leaves or the distant crack of a branch, Eleanor imagined Sierra keeping watch from afar. The day of the relocation dawned clear and cool. Gabriel arrived at the Tucker cabin before sunrise, his truck loaded with specialized equipment borrowed from the Wildlife Management Service. Meredith followed shortly after in the Forest Service vehicle, accompanied by a veterinarian specializing in large mammals. "We found them," Gabriel announced, "about 2 miles upstream in a small clearing. They're resting, which gives us the perfect opportunity." Eleanor nodded, her throat tight with emotion. She had dressed Lily warmly, packed a small bag with essentials, and prepared herself as best she could for the day ahead. "We're ready." The journey to the clearing was taken in silence, each adult lost in their own thoughts. Even Lily seemed to sense the gravity of the moment, remaining unusually quiet in her mother's arms. When they reached the edge of the clearing, Gabriel signaled for everyone to stop. There, in a patch of morning sunlight, lay Sierra and her cub. The mother bear was sprawled on her side, her cub nestled against her massive flank. They looked peaceful, untroubled, a perfect image of wilderness undisturbed by human concerns. The veterinarian prepared the tranquilizer darts with practiced efficiency. "Perfect dose for her size," she murmured to Meredith. "She'll sleep deeply but safely for the transport." Gabriel took the tranquilizer gun, his expression solemn. "I'll do it," he said quietly. "She knows me, at least a little." Eleanor hung back with Lily as Gabriel crept forward, moving with the stealth developed through years of wildlife photography. Sierra's ear twitched, but she didn't rise. Perhaps she did recognize his scent, or perhaps she was simply comfortable enough in her territory not to perceive a threat. The dart found its mark with a soft thump. Sierra grunted, rising partway before the tranquilizer took effect. She slumped back to the ground, her breathing deep and even. The cub, startled by its mother's movement, scampered a few feet away before returning to nuzzle against her unresponsive form. "The cub now," the veterinarian instructed, handing Gabriel a second, smaller dart. This proved more challenging. The cub, distressed by its mother's sudden stillness, darted among the trees, evading Gabriel's attempts to get a clear shot. Minutes stretched into a half-hour of careful stalking. To everyone's surprise, it was Lily who broke the stalemate. The baby suddenly squirmed in Eleanor's arms, pointing toward the frightened cub and making the same gentle babbling sounds she had used during the rescue. The cub froze, its head swiveling toward the sound. "Hold her still," Gabriel whispered, raising the tranquilizer gun. Eleanor complied, though her heart ached at the sight of Lily reaching for the frightened cub. The dart found its mark, and the small bear wobbled for a moment before collapsing in a heap of fur beside a fallen log. "Perfect," the veterinarian said, already moving forward with her medical kit. "Let's check their vitals and get them ready for transport." The next hour passed in a carefully coordinated flurry of activity. Sierra and her cub were examined thoroughly, fitted with tracking collars that would help researchers monitor their adaptation to their new territory, and carefully loaded onto specially designed stretchers. "The tranquilizer will wear off in about 4 hours, the veterinarian explained, as they secured the bears in the transport vehicle. "That gives us plenty of time to reach the release site and get them settled before they wake." The journey north was solemn and largely silent. Eleanor sat with Lily in the back seat of Gabriel's truck, following behind the transport vehicle along increasingly remote forest roads. The baby had fallen asleep, exhausted by the morning's excitement, her small hand still clutching the stuffed bear Gabriel had given her as a memento. Eleanor gazed out the window at the passing wilderness, her thoughts a tumultuous mix of relief, sadness, and wonder. "Do you think they'll be okay?" she finally asked, breaking the hour-long silence. Gabriel glanced at her in the rearview mirror. "Bears are incredibly adaptable," he said reassuringly, "and this new territory is perfect for them. Better than Pine Creek, honestly. More food, less human interference." "That's not what I meant," Eleanor said softly. "I meant, do you think they'll forget? About Lily? About what happened?" Gabriel's hands tightened on the steering wheel. "I don't know," he admitted. "Animal cognition is still largely a mystery to us, especially emotional memory. But I do know that what we witnessed was extraordinary. Once in a lifetime extraordinary." The convoy turned onto an unmarked road that barely qualified as more than a trail. The transport vehicle ahead bounced and swayed over the rough terrain. After another 30 minutes, even this rudimentary path ended, and Meredith signaled for them to stop. "This is as far as vehicles can go," she announced, climbing out of the Forest Service truck. "We'll need to carry them from here." Gabriel nodded, already unloading specialized wildlife transport backboards from his truck. "I scouted this area last fall for a photography project," he told Eleanor, as they prepared for the final leg of the journey. "It's about a mile to a beautiful valley with a pristine stream. Perfect bear habitat." The trek through the dense forest was challenging. The veterinarian and Meredith carried the cub's stretcher, while Gabriel and 2 wildlife assistants managed Sierra's much heavier form. Eleanor followed carefully behind, carrying Lily, who had awakened and was taking in the strange procession with wide-eyed fascination. Finally, they emerged from the thick trees into a breathtaking valley. A crystal-clear stream wound through lush meadows dotted with wildflowers. Steep, forested slopes rose on all sides, creating a natural sanctuary far from human development. "This is it," Meredith said, setting down her end of the cub's stretcher carefully. "Their new home." The team worked methodically to prepare the site. They placed Sierra and her cub side by side in a sheltered area near the stream, positioning them comfortably for when they awakened. The veterinarian checked their vital signs one final time, confirming that both bears were stable and beginning to show signs of the tranquilizer wearing off. "We should move back now," she advised. "Give them plenty of space when they wake up." The group retreated to a ridge overlooking the valley, a spot Gabriel assured them would be safe, but still offer a good view of the bear's awakening. Eleanor settled on a fallen log, Lily in her lap, her heart pounding with anticipation and a strange sense of loss. "How long?" she asked, watching the still forms of the bears below. "Another hour, maybe less," the veterinarian replied, checking her watch. "The cub will probably wake first." Gabriel had set up his professional camera equipment, determined to document this final chapter of Sierra's story. "I'm thinking of calling this series Unlikely Saviors," he said quietly to Eleanor. "If that's okay with you." Eleanor nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. Beside her, Lily babbled happily, pointing down at the bears as if recognizing old friends. Time passed slowly. The group spoke in hushed tones, sharing sandwiches and water as they waited. The sun had passed its zenith and was casting long shadows across the valley when the first signs of movement appeared below. The bear cub twitched, its small head lifting groggily. It struggled to its feet, stumbling slightly as the last effects of the tranquilizer wore off. Confused and disoriented, it circled its still sleeping mother, nudging her with its snout. "Normal behavior," the veterinarian whispered. "The cub is trying to rouse its mother." Sierra began to stir shortly after, her massive form shifting as consciousness returned. She rose unsteadily to her paws, shaking her head as if to clear it. The tracking collar seemed to irritate her briefly, and she pawed at it before apparently accepting the strange new accessory. The mother and cub reunited with visible relief, nuzzling each other and making soft vocalizations that carried faintly to the humans watching from above. After ensuring her cub was unharmed, Sierra began to explore their new surroundings, sniffing the air and testing the water of the stream with curious paws. "Perfect," Meredith breathed. "They're acclimating beautifully." Gabriel captured it all through his telephoto lens, the shutter of his camera clicking softly as he documented each moment of the bears' introduction to their new home. "This is going better than I could have hoped," he murmured. Eleanor watched in silence, tears streaming down her cheeks. There was beauty in this ending, she knew. Sierra and her cub were safe, protected, given a fresh start away from the dangers of human encroachment. Yet she couldn't shake the feeling that something magical was slipping away, a connection between worlds that might never be replicated. Lily seemed to share her mother's emotional conflict. The baby had grown unusually still in Eleanor's lap, her eyes fixed on the bears below. Suddenly, she let out a high-pitched call, Not quite a word, not quite a cry, but something primal and unmistakable. The sound carried across the valley, echoing slightly against the distant slopes. Below, both bears froze. Sierra's head swiveled upward, her sensitive ears pinpointing the source of the sound immediately. Her dark eyes seemed to lock directly on Lily, despite the considerable distance. "Impossible," the veterinarian whispered. "She shouldn't be able to distinguish human forms from this distance." But the evidence was unmistakable. Sierra stood perfectly still, staring up at the ridge where the humans watched. The bear cub followed its mother's gaze, its head tilted in an almost questioning posture. "She remembers," Eleanor said softly. "She knows who we are, who Lily is." For a breathless moment, the two species regarded each other across the physical and metaphorical distance that separated their worlds. Then Sierra did something that left even Gabriel, with all his years of wildlife experience, speechless. The massive bear rose briefly on her hind legs, a posture typically used for better visibility or as a prelude to aggression. But instead of dropping back to all fours, she remained upright for several seconds longer than necessary. The gesture seemed deliberate, almost ceremonial. "She's saying goodbye," Gabriel breathed, his camera temporarily forgotten in his hands. Eleanor lifted Lily slightly, raising her own hand in a mirroring farewell. "Goodbye, Sierra," she whispered. "Be safe here." As if released from a spell, Sierra dropped back to all fours and turned away. With purposeful steps, she led her cub toward the far end of the valley, occasionally looking back as if to ensure the small bear was following. Within minutes, they had disappeared into the dense forest at the valley's edge. The humans on the ridge remained silent, the weight of what they had witnessed settling over them like an invisible mantle. Finally, Meredith cleared her throat. "I've been a ranger for 15 years, she said quietly. "I've never seen anything like that. Never." The veterinarian nodded in agreement. "There are aspects of animal cognition and behavior we're only beginning to understand," she offered. "But this—" She shook her head, professional detachment momentarily shaken. "This was exceptional." Gabriel began packing his equipment, his movements slow and thoughtful. "I have the photographs," he said to Eleanor. "Whenever you're ready, I can show you." Eleanor nodded, still cradling Lily close. "Thank you," she murmured. "For everything." The return journey was made mostly in reflective silence. By the time they reached the vehicles, the afternoon was waning, golden light filtering through the forest canopy. As Gabriel helped Eleanor secure Lily in her car seat, he hesitated. "I've been thinking," he said carefully. "Those photos, they tell an incredible story. A story the world might benefit from hearing." Eleanor tensed. "But you said, not the full story," Gabriel clarified quickly. "Not the parts that might put Sierra at risk or bring unwanted attention to this location, but a version, a story about conservation, about the unexpected connections between species, about the importance of preserving these wild spaces." He gestured toward the forest around them, with Meredith's approval, of course. "As a scientific case study, perhaps," Meredith said, joining them. "With locations and identifying details altered. The conservation message is important." Eleanor considered this as she gazed at Lily, now happily playing with her stuffed bear. "What do you think, little one?" she whispered. "Should we share our special secret with the world?" Lily gurgled happily, reaching out to pat her mother's cheek with a chubby hand. "I'll think about it," Eleanor told Gabriel. "Let's give it some time." 6 months later, the prestigious wildlife magazine National Geographic published a special feature titled "Unlikely Saviors: The Remarkable Intelligence and Compassion of the North American Black Bears." The article, authored by Gabriel Harrison with contributions from Ranger Meredith Chambers, detailed the rescue and relocation of a mother bear and her cub in the Pacific Northwest. The story, carefully edited to protect the exact location and timing of events, included a series of stunning photographs. The most powerful image, the one that earned Gabriel his first National Geographic cover, showed a mother bear standing upright at the edge of a pristine valley, gazing back at the camera in what appeared to be a conscious farewell. The article made passing reference to the extraordinary circumstances of the bear's rescue from a life-threatening entanglement, attributing the success to the collaborative efforts of local conservationists and Forest Service personnel. Only Eleanor, Gabriel, and Meredith knew the full truth, that the real hero of the story was a 10-month-old girl whose innocent compassion had bridged the divide between species. The article sparked renewed interest in bear conservation efforts and led to stricter regulations against abandoned fishing gear in national forests. Gabriel's photographs toured galleries across the country, raising substantial funds for wildlife protection initiatives. Meredith received a promotion to senior conservation officer, allowing her to implement new protection measures for bear habitats throughout the region. And in a small cabin by Pine Creek, Eleanor Tucker kept a framed photograph on Lily's bedroom wall. Not the famous magazine cover, but a private image Gabriel had captured in the moment after Sierra and her cub disappeared into the forest. It showed Lily reaching out toward the empty valley, her expression one of pure, uncomplicated love. Beneath the photograph, a simple inscription read, "Some connections transcend understanding." Life at Pine Creek settled into a new rhythm. Eleanor continued her work as a botanical illustrator, finding inspiration in the forest that surrounded their home. Lily grew steadily, taking her first unassisted steps just after her first birthday. The experience with Sierra seemed to have awakened something in the child, a preternatural affinity for animals that manifested in countless small ways. Birds that normally scattered at human approach would perch calmly on branches while Lily watched from below. Deer would freeze rather than flee when she toddled into clearings. Even the normally reclusive foxes that denned near the creek would sometimes sit at a distance, observing the child with curious eyes. Eleanor documented these interactions in a private journal, unwilling to subject her daughter to the attention such unusual abilities might attract, but determined to preserve the memories. Gabriel visited occasionally, always bringing updates on Sierra and her cub from the tracking data collected by Forest Service monitors. The bears were thriving in their new territory, establishing a healthy range and successfully foraging in the abundant landscape. Then, on a crisp autumn morning, nearly a year after Sierra's relocation, something unexpected appeared on the cabin's porch. Eleanor discovered it when she stepped outside to collect the morning mail. A small, perfectly formed circle of pine cones, arranged with such precision that it could not possibly be the work of wind or weather. "Gabriel," she called immediately on her satellite phone, "I think you should come over. There's something you need to see." Gabriel arrived within the hour, his expression changing from curiosity to stunned disbelief as Eleanor showed him the arrangement. "This isn't random," he confirmed, examining the pine cones carefully. "This was deliberate." "Could it be teenagers playing pranks?" Eleanor asked, though she already knew the answer. Gabriel shook his head. "We're miles from the nearest public trail. No one comes out this far." He hesitated, then asked the question hanging between them. "Do you think it could be—" "Sierra?" Eleanor finished. "Is that even possible? They're 70 miles away." "Bears can travel remarkable distances when motivated," Gabriel said slowly. "They have incredible spatial memory and navigational abilities. But this..." He gestured at the perfect circle. This level of deliberate communication would be unprecedented. They agreed to set up wildlife cameras around the cabin perimeter, discreetly, positioned to capture any nocturnal visitors without frightening them away. Gabriel installed the equipment that afternoon, synchronizing the motion-activated cameras to his laptop. For 3 nights, nothing appeared. The cameras captured the usual forest inhabitants, raccoons, a wandering coyote, the resident barred owl, but no bears. Eleanor began to think they had overreacted, attributing meaning to what might have been mere coincidence. On the 4th night, the cameras activated at approximately 3:17 a.m. The footage, which Gabriel and Eleanor reviewed with trembling hands the following morning, clearly showed a black bear approaching the cabin porch. Not just any bear, Sierra, identifiable by the tracking collar still fastened around her neck. The massive animal moved with deliberate care, placing each paw silently as she approached the cabin. She carried something in her mouth, which she deposited carefully on the porch steps before retreating into the darkness. The entire visit lasted less than 2 minutes. "What did she leave?" Eleanor whispered, her voice barely audible. They found it exactly where the footage showed. A small piece of honeycomb, still fragrant with wild honey, placed precisely in the center of the pine cone circle. Gabriel stared at the offering in disbelief. "This isn't just remarkable," he said finally. "This is revolutionary, this level of deliberate symbolic behavior in a wild bear." He looked up at Eleanor, his expression a mix of awe and professional excitement. "This changes everything we understand about animal cognition." Eleanor knelt beside the strange gift, emotions washing over her in waves. "She came back," she whispered, "all this way just to—" She couldn't finish the thought, overwhelmed by the implications. "The question is why," Gabriel said, already setting up additional cameras, "and whether she'll return." They didn't have to wait long for an answer. That very night, as Eleanor was putting Lily to bed, she heard a soft scratching at the cabin's back door. Heart pounding, she lifted her sleepy daughter and moved cautiously to the window. Sierra stood in the yard, her massive form unmistakable in the porch light Eleanor had left burning. But this time, she wasn't alone. Her cub, now nearly grown but still recognizable, stood beside her. And between them, sitting calmly on the forest floor, was a third bear. "Gabriel," Eleanor whispered urgently into her phone. "They're here, right now, but there's another bear with them, a different one." "I'm 15 minutes away," Gabriel replied, the sound of keys jingling in the background. "Don't do anything, just observe. And Eleanor, stay inside." But as she watched from the window, Lily suddenly squirmed in her arms, becoming fully awake as she spotted the bears. "Bah!" the child exclaimed, one of her few recognizable words, usually reserved for her stuffed bear. "Bah! Bah!" The bear's ears pivoted forward at the sound of Lily's voice. Sierra took a tentative step closer to the cabin, her snout raised as if trying to catch the child's scent through the glass. Against all caution and common sense, Eleanor found herself unlocking the back door. Something deep within her, the same instinct that had allowed her to accept Lily's impossible connection with these wild creatures, told her there was no danger here, not from Sierra. She stepped onto the back porch, Lily secure in her arms. "Hello, Sierra," she said softly. "You came back." The massive bear remained perfectly still, her dark eyes reflecting the porch light. The cub, now much larger than when they'd last seen it, pawed uncertainly at the ground. The third bear, a male, Eleanor guessed from its size and the breadth of its shoulders, hung back, seemingly wary of the human scent. Lily babbled excitedly, reaching toward the bears with outstretched arms. To Eleanor's amazement, Sierra responded by rising briefly onto her hind legs, the same farewell gesture she had made in the valley a year earlier. This time, however, it didn't feel like goodbye. The moment was interrupted by the sound of Gabriel's truck coming up the drive. The male bear immediately retreated into the tree line, but Sierra and her cub remained, watching as Gabriel's headlights swept across the yard. Gabriel emerged from his vehicle slowly, camera in hand, his movements deliberately non-threatening. "Incredible," he breathed, taking in the scene. "She found you. After all this time, all that distance." He raised his camera, capturing the extraordinary reunion with quiet clicks of the shutter. For several minutes, humans and bears regarded each other across the yard. No words were spoken, none seemed necessary. Sierra's cub, emboldened perhaps by its mother's calm demeanor, took a few curious steps toward Lily. Eleanor tensed, but Sierra made no move to recall her offspring. "She trusts us," Gabriel whispered. "After everything, she still trusts us with her cub." The male bear, still hidden in the shadows of the forest edge, huffed impatiently. Sierra turned at the sound, then looked back at the humans one final time. With deliberate movements, she led her cub back toward the waiting male. At the forest edge, she paused, looking back over her massive shoulder, one last acknowledgement before the three bears disappeared into the darkness. Eleanor stood motionless, Lily warm and heavy in her arms, until the sound of rustling vegetation faded completely. "They're gone," she said finally, her voice thick with emotion. Gabriel lowered his camera, his expression thoughtful. "Not gone," he corrected gently, "just living their lives, as they should. But now we know something extraordinary." He gestured toward the forest where the bears had vanished. "They remember. They understand. And they chose to share that understanding with us." As they turned back toward the cabin, Eleanor noticed something in the spot where Sierra had stood. Another small honeycomb placed deliberately on a bed of fresh pine needles. Beside it lay a single perfect wildflower, its petals still moist with evening dew. "A gift," Gabriel said softly, photographing the offering without touching it. "From their world to ours." Eleanor hugged Lily closer, watching as her daughter's eyes drooped with returning sleepiness. "What does it mean?" she asked. "For them, for us? For everything we think we know about the divide between humans and wild animals?" Gabriel considered this as he carefully documented the bear's gift. "I don't know," he admitted finally, "but I think it means we have so much more to learn. And perhaps—" He glanced at Lily, now sleeping peacefully against her mother's shoulder. "Perhaps the best teachers are those who haven't yet been taught what's impossible." The story of Sierra and Lily Tucker might have remained a private miracle, known only to those who witnessed it firsthand, if not for an unexpected development 2 years later. By then, Lily had grown into a curious, verbal 3-year-old with an uncanny affinity for animals that continued to amaze her mother. Gabriel's photography career had flourished, his work with Sierra launching him into the upper echelons of wildlife photojournalism. He divided his time between international assignments and his cabin near Pine Creek, where he continued to document the seasonal changes of the forest and its inhabitants. The tracking collar on Sierra had long since stopped transmitting data, leading Forest Service officials to assume she had either managed to remove the device or had perished in the wilderness. Eleanor knew better. Though Sierra's visits had become less frequent over time, evidence of the bear's passage appeared occasionally near the cabin. Perfect circles of pine cones, small offerings of honeycomb or berries, once even a smooth river stone placed precisely on the back step. Each gift coincided with significant moments in Lily's life: her first words, her first steps alone in the forest, her 3rd birthday. Then came the winter storm that changed everything. A polar vortex, unprecedented in its intensity, descended on the Pacific Northwest like a frozen hammer. Temperatures plummeted to record lows, and snow accumulated faster than local authorities could clear it. Roads became impassable, power lines collapsed under the weight of ice, and even the most prepared residents found themselves struggling against nature's fury. Eleanor had stocked the cabin well, anticipating a harsh winter. They had firewood, food, warm clothes, everything needed to weather the storm in relative comfort. What she hadn't anticipated was the impact on the forest's wildlife. As the freeze deepened, animals began to appear near human habitations in desperate search of food. Deer ventured into yards, raccoons raided porches, and birds flocked to any available feeders. "The bears will have it worst," Gabriel told her during one of their satellite phone check-ins. "They should be hibernating. But this cold came on so suddenly some may not have had time to build up enough fat reserves. If they wake early because of hunger—" He didn't need to finish the thought. A hungry bear was a dangerous bear, regardless of past interactions. Eleanor began taking extra precautions, securing garbage indoors and keeping Lily away from the cabin windows that faced the forest. On the 14th day of the storm, with snow piled 6 feet high against the cabin walls, Eleanor awoke to Lily's voice. The child was standing at her bedroom window, pointing excitedly at something outside. "Bear! Bear hurt!" she exclaimed, her vocabulary still limited, but her meaning clear. Eleanor rushed to the window, her heart pounding. Through the swirling snow she could make out a dark shape at the edge of the cleared area around their cabin. A bear, certainly, but not moving with Sierra's confident grace. This animal was limping badly, barely able to support its weight. "Stay here," she told Lily firmly, already reaching for her coat and boots. "Don't open the window, promise me." "Promise," Lily agreed solemnly, her eyes wide with concern. "Help Bear." "I'm going to try," Eleanor said, not knowing if this was a promise she could keep. She called Gabriel immediately. "There's an injured bear near the cabin," she reported. "Not Sierra, I don't think. Smaller, maybe younger. It's limping badly and seems disoriented." "I'm snowed in," Gabriel replied, frustration evident in his voice. "The road to my place is completely blocked, and the Forest Service is overwhelmed with emergency calls." He paused. "Eleanor, be careful. An injured bear is unpredictable, regardless of your history with Sierra." "I know," she said quietly, "but I can't just watch it suffer." Armed with a tranquilizer gun Gabriel had left at the cabin for emergencies and a first aid kit designed for large animals, Eleanor ventured outside. The cold hit her like a physical blow, the wind driving snow into any exposed skin with needle-like precision. She squinted through the whiteout conditions, trying to locate the bear she'd spotted from the window. A low moan guided her to a depression in the snow near the woodshed. There, curled in a half-formed ball, lay a young black bear. Not a cub anymore, but not fully grown either, perhaps 2 or 3 years old. Its dark fur was crusted with ice, and one of its front paws was clearly injured, the pad lacerated and bleeding. Eleanor approached cautiously, the tranquilizer gun ready. The bear raised its head weakly, regarding her through pain-clouded eyes. Something in its gaze struck Eleanor as familiar, an intelligence, a connection that reminded her of Sierra. Could this be the cub, now grown? There was no way to be certain. The bear made no aggressive move as she drew closer. If anything, it seemed to relax slightly, its head lowering back to the snow as if in surrender or recognition. Taking a chance that defied all conventional wisdom about approaching injured wild animals, Eleanor set down the tranquilizer gun. "I'm going to help you," she said softly, using the same gentle tone she'd used with Sierra years earlier. "But you need to trust me." To her amazement, the bear remained completely still as she examined its injured paw. The laceration was deep but clean, likely caused by sharp ice or a hidden metal edge beneath the snow. It would need cleaning and possibly stitches, but didn't appear life-threatening. More concerning was the bear's temperature. Its body felt cool to the touch, suggesting dangerously low body heat. "You need to come inside," Eleanor murmured, knowing as she said it how absurd the notion was. Bringing a wild bear into her home, where her 3-year-old daughter waited. The idea defied all logic, all safety protocols, all common sense. Yet, as she looked into the bear's eyes, she saw something that transcended normal human-wildlife boundaries. Trust, or perhaps simply the absence of fear, which in a wild animal amounted to the same thing. Making a decision that would have horrified any wildlife expert, Eleanor began clearing a path toward the cabin's mudroom, a separate entrance with a door that could be closed off from the main house. The bear watched her efforts, making no attempt to flee despite having every opportunity. When the path was cleared, Eleanor returned to the injured animal. "Can you stand?" she asked, feeling slightly foolish for speaking to it as she would a person. To her astonishment, the bear struggled to its feet, swaying slightly but managing to stay upright. "This way," she encouraged, backing slowly toward the prepared path. "Just a little way." The bear followed. Not just a few hesitant steps, but the entire distance to the mudroom door, limping heavily but moving with what appeared to be deliberate purpose. Once inside the sheltered space, it collapsed onto the rug, its breathing labored but steadier than before. Eleanor quickly closed the outer door, then the inner door connecting to the main cabin. Through the small window she could see Lily's face pressed against the glass, her expression a mixture of concern and wonder. "Bear okay?" the child asked when Eleanor entered the main cabin. "I don't know yet," Eleanor admitted, "but I'm going to try to help it." She gathered supplies quickly. Clean towels, the veterinary first aid kit, a space heater, a bowl of fresh water. Gabriel had shown her basic wildlife first aid during their preparation for Sierra's relocation, but treating an injured bear alone, in her own home, was far beyond anything she'd anticipated. When she re-entered the mudroom, the bear was exactly where she'd left it, though its eyes tracked her movements alertly. Up close, in the better light, she could see details she'd missed outside. The bear was thin, not dangerously emaciated, but leaner than it should be in winter. Its fur, though ice-crusted in places, had a familiar pattern of lighter guard hairs around the muzzle. "Sierra's cub?" she wondered aloud. "Is that who you are?" The bear offered no confirmation, of course, but something in its steady gaze heightened Eleanor's suspicion. This was no random forest bear that had stumbled upon her cabin. This was an animal with a connection. To this place, to her, perhaps even to Lily. Working with careful, methodical movements, Eleanor cleaned the lacerated paw, applied antibiotic ointment, and bandaged it as best she could. The bear tolerated her ministrations with remarkable patience, flinching occasionally but making no aggressive moves. "You need to warm up," Eleanor told it, positioning the space heater at a safe distance, "and rest. When the storm breaks, we'll figure out what to do next." She left water and some thawed berries from her freezer, a poor substitute for a proper bear diet, but better than nothing. As she closed the mudroom door behind her, she couldn't shake the feeling that she had just crossed some invisible threshold between the human and wild worlds. Lily was waiting in the kitchen, her eyes huge with questions. "Bear sleeping?" she asked. "Yes, the bear is resting," Eleanor confirmed, washing her hands thoroughly at the sink. "But we need to be very careful, okay? The mudroom is off limits until our guest is feeling better." "Not guest," Lily said with the absolute certainty only a 3-year-old can muster. "Family." Eleanor paused, water still running over her hands. "What do you mean, sweetie?" Lily's expression was solemn, her blue eyes holding wisdom far beyond her years. "Sierra's baby. Come home." A chill that had nothing to do with the storm outside ran down Eleanor's spine. "How do you know that?" Lily simply shrugged, already turning her attention to her stuffed animals arranged on the living room floor. "Just know." Eleanor sat heavily at the kitchen table, her mind racing. Was it possible? Could the bear in her mudroom truly be Sierra's grown cub, returned to the place where its life had been saved years earlier? And if so, what did that mean about animal memory, about the connections formed in those extraordinary moments by the creek? She called Gabriel again, describing the bear's condition and her actions. "You brought a wild bear into your house?" His voice rose in disbelief. "Eleanor, that goes against everything." "I know," she interrupted. "I know what the experts would say, but Gabriel, you weren't here. You didn't see how it looked at me, how it followed me willingly, how it's resting peacefully now, not 20 feet from where Lily and I are sitting." There was a long silence on the line. Finally, Gabriel sighed. "The storm should break tomorrow. I'll come as soon as the roads are passable. Until then, just be careful, Eleanor. Keep that inner door locked, no matter what." She promised she would, though in her heart she felt no fear of the injured animal resting in her mudroom. Throughout the day, she checked on the bear regularly, changing its water, offering small amounts of food that it accepted with gentle delicacy. Lily drew pictures of bear family that Eleanor taped to the mudroom window, where the animal studied them with what seemed like genuine interest. That night, as the storm finally began to subside, Eleanor was awakened by a sound she hadn't heard in years, the deep, resonant call of a mother bear searching for her cub. She rushed to the window, and there, illuminated by moonlight reflecting off the snow, stood Sierra. The massive bear was even larger than Eleanor remembered, her coat thick and glossy despite the harsh winter. Sierra paced the cleared area before the cabin, stopping occasionally to raise her head and call again. The sound vibrated through the night air, equal parts question and command. In the mudroom, the injured bear responded with a weak but eager cry. Eleanor made a decision then, one that came not from rational thought but from the same instinct that had guided her when she'd found the bear injured in the snow. She opened the mudroom's outer door, stepped back, and waited. Sierra appeared in the doorway moments later, her enormous frame blocking the moonlight. She looked first at the injured bear, then at Eleanor, who stood very still just inside the main cabin door. Their eyes met in a moment of recognition that transcended species. With infinite gentleness, Sierra approached her injured offspring. She sniffed the bandaged paw, nuzzled the younger bear's face, and made soft sounds that seemed to communicate both concern and reassurance. The younger bear struggled to its feet, leaning against its mother for support. "Take care of him," Eleanor whispered, though she knew the bear needed no human instruction in caring for its young. Sierra looked at her one last time, and in that gaze Eleanor saw something she could never adequately describe to others. An acknowledgement, perhaps even gratitude, from one mother to another. Then, supporting the younger bear against her massive side, Sierra led her offspring out into the moonlit night. Eleanor watched until they disappeared into the forest, two dark shapes merging with the shadows between the trees. She closed the door slowly, aware that she had been part of something profound and inexplicable. In the morning, Gabriel arrived to find Eleanor and Lily standing on the porch, looking toward the forest edge where fresh bear tracks led away from the cabin. When she told him what had happened, he was silent for a long time, his camera forgotten in his hands. "There's more in this world than science can explain," he finally said. "More connections than we understand." Eleanor nodded, watching as Lily built a small circle of pine cones in the snow, a perfect mimicry of the offering Sierra had left over the years. "They came back to us when they needed help," she said softly, "just as we went to them." "A circle," Gabriel agreed, "like Lily's pine cones." As spring returned to Pine Creek, bringing new life to the forest, Eleanor often found herself watching the tree line for familiar shapes. Sierra and her offspring didn't return, but evidence of their passage appeared occasionally. A perfect honeycomb left on a stump. Unusual tracks circling the cabin on nights when Lily had been particularly ill with childhood fever. A family of deer that seemed unusually comfortable grazing near the porch when the child played outside. Years passed. Lily grew from a curious toddler into a thoughtful child with an uncanny affinity for animals. Eleanor documented their life together in journals and photographs, building a record of the extraordinary connection that had begun with a baby's compassion for a drowning bear. Gabriel's photographs of Sierra gained international recognition, sparking conservation efforts that led to the creation of a wildlife preserve encompassing much of the forest surrounding Pine Creek. He never revealed the full story of the bear's rescue, honoring his promise to Eleanor, but his images conveyed enough of the truth to change hearts and minds about the intelligence and emotional capacity of these magnificent creatures. On Lily's 7th birthday, Eleanor took her daughter to the creek where it had all begun. The water flowed peacefully over smooth stones, fish darting in the dappled shadows. They sat together on the bank, watching a family of otters play in the shallows. "Mom," Lily said suddenly, her voice serious beyond her years, "do you think Sierra remembers us?" Eleanor considered the question carefully. "I think some connections never truly break," she said finally, "even when we can't see each other anymore." Lily nodded, satisfied with this answer. She leaned down and arranged 7 small stones in a perfect circle at the water's edge, her own offering to the forest and its guardians. As twilight descended, mother and daughter walked hand in hand back toward their cabin. Behind them, unnoticed in the deepening shadows, a massive black bear emerged briefly from the tree line. Sierra, older now, her muzzle touched with gray, watched them go, standing sentinel until they reached the safety of their home. Then, with deliberate care, she approached the circle of stones Lily had left by the water. She studied it for a moment, her intelligent eyes reflecting the last light of day. With gentle movements of her massive paw, she added an 8th stone to complete the pattern. Message delivered, connection maintained, Sierra turned and disappeared once more into the forest that was her home, a realm separate from, yet forever connected to, the human world through bonds of compassion forged in a moment of crisis and sealed through years of mutual respect. In that quiet forest by Pine Creek, 2 different worlds continued to orbit each other like